Can Rishi Sunak really turn it around in just 2 years?
Well, the truth is that the precedent of history indicates that's going to be very, very difficult. Every previous post-war British government that presided over a fiscal stroke financial crisis did not manage to survive at the ballot box at the next election. I'm just remind you of Harold Wilson devaluing the pound in 1967, losing in 1970. The Labour Party in 1976 having to go to cap in hand to the IMF for a loan, losing in 1979. John Major in 1992, presiding over Black Wednesday when the pound was forced out of the European exchange rate mechanism, losing, albeit 4.5 years later, very badly in 1997. And Gordon Brown presiding over the financial crash in 2008, unable to win in 2010. So it's a very, very substantial challenge. Now, the one thing that's different is indeed this is the first fiscal crisis to have brought down the Prime Minister of the time. So maybe having a different Prime Minister might make it somewhat easier to persuade the public to forget about what happened during Ms Truss's short premiership. But voters tend to remember when governments are essentially forced into economic action they did not want to take as a result of the financial markets. Voters take their cue from the financial markets that this perhaps is a sign of economic incompetence. And it's something that just becomes seared on their memory, not least, of course, because it often has direct implications for them. So it's a very, very substantial challenge. And of course, whereas John Major, at least after Black Wednesday, presided over very healthy economic growth, the economic prospects for the next 2 years are not that good. And that's not going to make the Conservatives' chances of winning the next general election any brighter either. So, Mr. Sunak will doubtless be delighted to finally have got the keys to number 10 Downing Street, but he's going to find the next 2 years pretty tough if he's going to extend his tenure beyond the next general election.
Yes, there's that famous phrase, it's the economy stupid when it comes to winning elections. And yet, looking back to 1997, there was 4% growth. There was a budget surplus. There was the most miraculous economic recovery and really strong fundamentals. And yet, the most enormous defeat for the incumbent government. To some extent, there's more to it than the economy. What more must this government do to win back the support of the British people?
So the other thing that was, of course, was true about the 92 to 97 government is that having been forced out of the European exchange rate, the Conservative Party then proceeded to divide over Europe. And I think one of the questions we are asking ourselves is, having had the experience of the last 4 weeks, is whether the Conservative Party is going to continue to argue about, one, whether Boris Johnson should or should not have been allowed onto the ballot, two, whether or not the party should be pursuing the programme of austerity that now seems almost bound to be heading down the track, and three, whether or not it should be trying to reduce the size of the state more than perhaps is going to happen during the course of the next 2 years. So, are those arguments going to continue? And, while I think the honest truth is that Boris Johnson eventually realised that he was going to struggle to form a stable administration because of the number of MPs who would not be willing to support him as Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak also will face a group of people who will feel that he's presided over a coup, who feel that he's not been honest to true Conservative principles, help to ensure that Boris Johnson fell. They may equally also be reluctant to back him.
And on that point, for Keir Starmer's Labour Party, is the best bet for them to just kind of sit tight whilst the Conservatives continue to argue and debate a lot of these issues about the future of the Conservative Party? Or are there things that Keir Starmer's Labour Party need to do to not be complacent in this time?
Well, I think what's almost bound to be true now is that if indeed, as we anticipate that the Labour Party will continue to be ahead in the polls, albeit probably not at the level at which they are at the moment, that they're almost inevitably going to start to be subjected to much more scrutiny. Mm-hmm. People are going to be saying, well, hang on, the opinion polls suggest you're going to win. What would you do about X, Y, and Z? And the truth is that one of the characteristics of Sir Keir Starmer's leadership so far has been to be relatively light on willingness to indicate where the Labour Party might propose come a general election. Now, to some degree, people would say that, in the first half of Parliament, that makes sense, because if you come up with too many good ideas, they get pinched by the government. I mean, the Labour Party came up with the idea of a windfall tax, and eventually the Conservative government adopted at least in some form. The Labour Party was one of the opposition parties that came up in favour of doing something about capping energy price rises, and then the government eventually does it. So you can see the risk for an opposition of being too precise. But I think now people will be looking to see, well, hang on, what would the Labour Party offer? And there is still a sense out there that, one, people, yes, Sir Keir Starmer is acceptable, but he's not exciting. And two, a feeling still that people are not entirely sure what the Labour Party stands for. So I think Labour now are going to have to be a bit more forthcoming in future about where they stand, about some of the policy detail, in order to be, in a sense, to cement the deal with the electorate that they do look like an alternative government that perhaps might be able to run things more effectively than the current administration.
Yes, I've noticed Sir Keir Starmer's favourite answer to any question on policy is, I'm not going to sit here and write the manifesto on this programme. Well, at some point he is going to have to...
and that's increasingly difficult to sustain if you're then also saying, but we want to have a general election now. If you say you want to have a general election now, then it seems to be reasonable to say, well, OK, if there were to be a general election, what would you be offering the electorate?